Let's now learn the basics of flex property, which is the property we use actually size the flex items. Remember from our flexbox property overview that the flex property is a shorthand for three different properties, that is flex grow, flex shrink and flex basis. So let's learn each of these three properties one by one. Before we start, I'm just commenting this one and just commenting all of this. I'm selecting all the elements and giving the flex grow to 0, as the default value of grow is 0, and flex shrink to 1, and flex basis to auto. So these are the default values. And I'm just commenting this. Now let's start with the flex basis. Actually, when we want to define the size of a flex item, especially its width, we usually don't use the width property. Instead, we use flex basis. For example, if we want our flex items to have a size of 100 pixels. Now, you might expect every element to be exactly 100 pixels wide, but that's not necessarily what happens. If the content inside an element is larger than 100 pixels, the element can become larger to make sure the content fits. So, flex basis is not necessarily a rigid width. It is more likely a starting size or recommendation that we give to the browser. The browser then considers the available space and the content and determines the final size. For example, if I give 200 pixels, there won't be any change because there isn't enough space inside the flex container for every element to be a 200 pixels wide. Flexbox need to figure out how to deal with this situation, and that's where flex shrink comes in. Remember that the default value of flex shrink is 1. So this means the flexbox is allowed to shrink flex items if necessarily. If there isn't enough space inside the container to give every element is desired 200 pixel size, flexbox can shrink the elements. That's why you might end up with elements that are smaller than 200 pixels. So essentially, flex shrink determines whether a flex item is allowed to shrink when there isn't enough available space. For a reference, I'm just commenting out this one also. As you can see the difference. So if I keep this as 0, now the elements will maintain their 200 pixel size. If I go to inspect, so as you can see, all of them maintain their 200 pixel size. However, if there isn't enough space in the container, the content may overflow the container. So setting flex shrink to 0 is not always the best solution, but there is a solution where it is exactly what we need. We actually come across one of these solutions later in the OmniFood project. Let's look at the opposite of flex shrink. The property is flex grow. This determines whether the flex items are allowed to grow and fill the remaining empty spaces inside the flex container. The default value of flex grow is 0. This means that the default flex items do not automatically grow to fill the remaining space. So if I keep flex grow to 0, nothing changes. So if I give 1, okay, let me remove the gap actually. And commenting the flex basis also. Yeah, as you can see, if I give 1, now the elements are allowed to grow. Now the elements are allowed to grow to all of our flex items. The remaining empty spaces inside the container is distributed equally between them. So all the elements grow together, fill the entire available width. Now let's see what happens if one flex items has the flex grow to 1. Now only the first element is allowed to grow. The other elements remain at the same required to the content. The first element takes all the remaining available space. So if I keep this to 0, now you see the difference. Only the first element takes the remaining space, then the other elements remain at the size required to the content. So instead of all the elements growing, only the first element grows. This can be very useful when we want one particular element to take up the remaining spaces. Now let's go back to giving all the elements. Just commenting this out and give this 1. When all elements have the same flex grow value, they receive an equal share of remaining spaces, and it does not actually have to be 1. For example, if all of them have flex grow 5, now they will still have the same size. What matters is the ratio between the values. Let's say 4 elements have flex grow 1 and 1 element has flex grow 2. It has flex grow of 2. They have 1. The element with flex grow 2 receives twice as much as the remaining empty space as each element with flex grow 1. So remember, flex grow controls how the remaining empty spaces is distributed. It does not directly mean that an element will be twice as wide. It means that the element receives twice as much as the available space remaining. In practice, a very common thing we want is for the all flex items to expand and fill the available spaces. So we can simply write it to 1. Now all the elements share the remaining space equally. We can still have a gap between them. Let's take 20. The elements will grow equally while maintaining the specified gap. Now let's finally talk about the flex property itself. It is a shorthand for flex grow, flex shrink and flex basis. So instead of writing the flex grow, we can simply write to flex 1. If I take this, if I comment this for a basic time, now I'm using the shorthand here. As the order, the grow value is 0 and we have given the shrink value also 0, and the flex basis, if you remove this and I'm keeping 0, as you can see it is overflowed. Now if I comment this and give the shorthand, flex basis, the third one, to 200 pixels, it is much more similar. So we don't use 3 properties. Instead of that, we use the single shorthand property, that is nothing but flex. So I'm just keeping this comment and leaving this alone. I know this is a lot to take in, and I'm sure some of this sounds confusing at first, especially the flex property. So I don't expect you to completely understand every detail yet. The important thing is that you have now been introduced to the concept of flex grow, flex shrink, flex basis, and the flex shorthand. Once we start using these 3 properties in our real project, everything will become much cleaner, and that's exactly what we will do next.